parents have been pastors since before I was even born, and so I grew up knowing a ton about God, but never really knowing Him personally for myself. When I was 13, my parents decided to move to Africa to become missionaries. I ended up going to this boarding school in East Africa, and my parents dropped me off, and I was by myself. I had never experienced Africa before. And where my parents went to serve had actually just gotten out of civil war. And so there was no infrastructure, no phone lines, no internet, nothing. And so they actually couldn't call me for my first 3 months at boarding school. So I'm this 8th grade kid. I've never been to Africa before, just got dropped off, basically moved out of home at 13, have to figure out how to do this on my own, almost completely alone. That is really where I met God. And He really became a father to me. And for the next 5 years, He fathered me. So fast forward, I'm getting ready to graduate from this boarding school in Kenya, and I've gotten into this awesome school in central New York. Everyone is really impressed with me. I feel really awesome about myself. I'm getting ready to move back to America, and I have no idea what I'm in for. I had loved Africa, and it was the only place that I had ever really called home, and so leaving the continent felt really traumatic for me, and I experienced brutal culture shock. I remember I would dream about Africa every night and wake up sobbing, just feeling like, what have I done? Where am I? Feeling like I didn't have any place in the whole world to call my own. But I just had this deep desire to belong and to be accepted. And so I began to do whatever it took in the community that I was in to fit in. I ended up doing so many things that I had promised myself I would never do, just in this desire to be accepted. By the time I graduated from the 4 years at that university, I had hit every rock bottom that you could literally imagine. And I was so overcome and filled with shame because I still loved God in my heart so much, but if you looked at my life on paper, it looked like I was the farthest thing from a Christian. While I was in college, my parents had taken a job pastoring a church in Fort Erie, Ontario. And I had to come home for the summer in order for my immigration to go through for me to take a job that I had received back in New York. And I was so hungry for God at that time. I was just so empty and so depleted. I thought to myself, I will find a church for the summer. And so I Googled churches, and Light City came up, and I remember seeing on the website that there were young people and telling myself like, okay, I'll try this church. And finding Light City was like taking a breath of fresh air after 4 years of drowning. I re-encountered the presence of the Lord, and I re-met this God who I had loved so much in Africa, but I found here the presence of the Lord in such a thick and tangible way that I'd never experienced in my whole life, but had always longed for. And I fell in love. I was here every time they opened the church doors. Anytime I was allowed to be here, I was here just soaking up the presence of the Lord. But I still fully intended to leave Fort Erie as soon as my immigration was processed. Staying in Fort Erie wasn't even an option in my mind until one day I remember the Lord took me to that verse in Matthew 7 where God's talking to people who are saying like, hey, I did all these amazing things in your name. And the Lord said to them, but I never knew you. And in that moment, I knew that the Lord was giving me this opportunity to decide how I wanted to know God, not just in like a, what I can do for Him or what He can do for me sort of way, but in this real deep covenant way, like this opportunity to know God with my whole heart and know Him even with my whole life. And so I knew I had to respond. I quit the job that I had already said yes to. I canceled my visa application that I had already spent $2,000 for. And I moved everything into my parents' basement in Fort Erie and took a waitressing job so that I could stay here and go to church on Wednesdays and Sundays. And everyone that I knew thought I had completely lost it. They thought that I had gone crazy or that I was having a nervous breakdown. Everyone told me that I was throwing my whole life away. But the truth is, looking back, is that giving my life away for Jesus was the best decision that I have ever made. Almost as soon as I said yes to Jesus and laid everything down, He started giving me everything back. more amazing than I could have ever imagined or planned for myself. And within a year of saying yes to stay here, God opened door after door and worked miracle after miracle and completely transformed my entire life. And now it's like comical. I literally have the best life in the entire world, and you couldn't pay me to leave Fort Erie, and you certainly could not pay me to leave Light City. And I know with my whole heart that I found my home, and even more importantly than that, I know that I've found my family. My name is Amy, and I believe in miracles.